Hello friends, my name is Emile and welcome back to some more Forza Top Gear laps. Today we're taking a look at some British cars. Let's dive straight into it with the first car today. It's the McLaren 12C, 592 horsepower, 3,031 pounds of weight. The 12C was McLaren's return to independent car building, and what a return it was. Yeah, the 12C is a pretty extraordinary vehicle. Anyways, statistically, it doesn't actually look all that amazing. 592 horsepower, 3,031 pounds isn't exactly out the ordinary for a modern supercar, but for whatever reason, this car will just chew up a Ferrari 458 Italia around a track. So, how does it actually drive? Well, it's a very active car. That's the best way to describe it. It definitely keeps you on your toes. It's not a bad car to drive, but you really need to be sort of aware of what's happening when you're driving this car, especially in the wet, because it will just throw you off the track if you're not being aware enough. Now, the upside to that, of course, is that this car is very quick. It is just extraordinarily fast. I don't know if it's just because I've been driving 60s, 70s, 80s and 90s cars for the past couple of weeks, but it is very nice to be behind the wheel of a modern supercar once again. Now, this thing could actually challenge the F1 for the top of our leaderboard, so stay tuned towards the end of the episode where we'll find out whether it did or not. Moving on to the next car today, the Caterham Superlight R500, 263 horsepower, 1,116 pounds of weight. This is the least powerful vehicle here today, however it is by far and away the lightest. 1,116 pounds, there really is not a lot that gets close to this in terms of lightweight, i.e. I think like the Isetta and the Lotus 11 are the only two cars that spring to mind that are lighter than this. Now, in the wet, this car is very, very tricky to drive. I honestly thought that this car could be towards the top of our leaderboard, maybe even toppling the Lotus 211, which is sort of the closest car to this. But when I started driving it, that's when sort of reality started sitting. You cannot full throttle this car in the wet. It just will not accept it. I tried doing full throttle starts off the line, the car literally just spins around in a circle. You have to be on 3/4 throttle through basically all of this. You cannot full power this car anywhere other than the straights if you're in like third gear going about 90 miles per hour. It is fantastically quick. This thing is just stupid fast. This thing rivals like aerial atoms in the acceleration department, but you just cannot put the power down. There is simply too much power in this car for such a light little vehicle. Yeah, but we will have to see how it does around the track, because it should still be pretty quick. Next up we have the Lotus Exige S, 345 horsepower, 2,593 pounds of weight. I believe this might be the first ever time I've driven this car in Forza Motorsport 6. I do really like the modern Exige S, but it's just sort of a car which has faded into the background a little bit for me in this game. However, I do have to say the Exige was very, very good indeed to drive. It feels heavier than it is, which is a little bit strange. It only weighs 2,593 pounds. Honestly, it feels like it weighs 1,000 pounds more than that. However, that does mean it is very stable through the corners. It is a very, very nice driving car, this one. I did enjoy my time with the Exige S. It's 345 horsepower for a Lotus is quite a lot. Then again, the weight is, for a Lotus, a bit on the heavier side. Not quite as heavy as, say, an Evora, but definitely heavier than an Elise or anything like that. But yeah, unfortunately it isn't ludicrously quick. 345 horsepower compared to most things here today makes it the second least powerful vehicle here today by a decent margin. So, yeah, not the quickest car in the world, but through the corners, my god, it's good. I do seriously recommend trying out the Exige S for yourself. You will be pleasantly surprised by this vehicle. Next up, we have the TVR Sagaris, 406 horsepower, 2,377 pounds of weight. Yeah, 2,377 pounds of weight is not a lot. That's ridiculous. It's lighter than the Exige S, which is a Lotus. Yeah, the TVR is very light. It's just baffling to me whenever I look at that figure, because I sort of look at the car and go, how the hell does that weigh 2,377 pounds? I always get amazed by the weight of it. But anyways, it does have 406 horsepower, and as you'd imagine, for a 2,000 pound car with 400 horsepower, it's quick. Through the corners, it's okay. It is very much a slidey vehicle. That's sort of what it wants to do, as you'd kind of expect from a TVR. It just wants to kick its tail out all the time. That does mean on a track, especially in the rain, it's great fun to drive. Unfortunately, not quite as conclusive towards a good lap time as you might expect, but it certainly is not a bad car. And again, it's very quick. You know, again, this is a car which on our leaderboard should be going towards the top despite the handling, just because on the straights it's quick, and that's sort of a thing with most of the vehicles here today. You know, they are very quick in a straight line, which is good. That's sort of what you'd expect the American cars to do, but no, the Brits are apparently quick in a straight line. So yeah. Anyways, next up we have a Jaguar XKR-S GT, 542 horsepower, 3,977 pounds of weight. I reviewed this car a fair few months ago in this game, and if you want some proper driving opinions on it, then go take a look at that review if you want some more in-depth look at the XKR-S. Anyways, actual driving impressions from when I drove it today, though, it's a lot better than I initially remember it being. I don't really remember driving the XKR-S GT all that much, because I haven't driven it in a few months. But yeah, it was a pretty darn good car to drive, actually. It's a really well composed car through the corners, which you wouldn't expect in the rain from a 542 horsepower, let's face it, heavyweight GT car. You know, it does weigh almost 4,000 pounds, which is an awful lot, but it's surprisingly good through the corners. It does feel heavy, but again, of course, as I said earlier, cars feeling heavy isn't necessarily a bad thing, because they, you know, that can sort of make the car feel very planted. It's sort of the way I like my cars to drive. I prefer them to drive much more like this than I do, say, the 12C or the Caterham, where I'm constantly on my toes. I much prefer cars to sort of be more composed in general. Next up, we have an Aston Martin Vanquish, 565 horsepower, 3,834 pounds of weight. This is one of my favourite cars in the entire world. I absolutely adore the Vanquish. I do think it is the best looking car in the world, and I will stand by that probably until the end of time, especially considering where Aston Martin is going at the moment. Anyways, of course, while it may look good, it also has to handle, and the Vanquish was good. It's a good car to drive. It drives very much as you would probably expect. It is a bit on the heavier side. It does weigh less than the Jag, but surprisingly enough, I actually found this sort of a little bit harder to drive than the Jag, although really not by much. A bit of a tail slide out there, just clip that puddle. I am getting used to the sort of lines you have to take with the puddles. Ultimately, through the hammerhead, you don't really have too much control of the car, so yeah, that's a bit interesting to try and avoid the puddles. Some cars you can drive straight through it, other cars you really have to sort of turn yourself away from it. Anyways, yeah, I enjoyed driving the Vanquish. It is quick. 565 horsepower is quite a lot. It's the third most powerful vehicle here today. Yeah, I did enjoy my time with the Vanquish. I always enjoy any time I get to spend with this car because I absolutely adore it. It's just utterly perfect. And finally today we have the Bentley Continental GT, 617 horsepower, 5,115 pounds of weight. This is the most powerful vehicle here today. Yeah, really, it's more powerful than the 12C. However, it is by far and away the heaviest, by almost 1,000, well, actually by 1,000 pounds, almost 1,100 pounds. Despite this though, the Continental is actually a pretty good vehicle to drive. It's a lot better than I remember it. You know, usually I would think this car is very much a heavyweight bruiser, you know, it doesn't really handle all that well, kind of understeery. But I was pleasantly surprised. I don't know if it's just because the rain sort of makes the car a bit better to drive, because it has got four-wheel drive and the weight does plant it a bit more, but yeah, it's a better car to drive than I remember it being. It does feel remarkably heavy though. This thing really feels like a tank to drive. Also, seating position's quite high in this vehicle, which is a little bit strange. It does kind of feel like you're driving an SUV more than a sports coupe, but as we know in this game, of course, SUVs are surprisingly good to drive, so yeah, the Continental is also pretty darn good to drive actually, a lot better than you'd probably expect it. I would prefer the V8 version to be in this game, as I believe that weighs a little bit less and probably has a bit of a better engine note, but the V12's still fine by me. Anyways, onto the times, and the McLaren 12C just misses out on the McLaren F1 by 0.6 of a second. Still sits a pretty respectable lap time though, we're on 20.649. Beats a Ferrari F40 by almost a second, beats a Lamborghini Gallardo Superleggera by over a second. Caterham Superlight goes into 6th with 123.512, misses out on the Lotus 211 by over a second and a half. The car just was not composed enough around the track, unfortunately, to set a decent enough lap time. Moving down the board, we find the rest of the vehicles from today. The TVR Sagaris goes into 10th with 124.690. Lotus Exige S goes into 11th with 124.758, losing out to the TVR. Aston Martin Vanquish sets a pretty good time, going into 12th with 125.023. The Jaguar XKR-S gets beaten by a 99 Dodge Viper, going into 14th for 125.522, missing out on the Viper by 0.4 of a second. And finally today, the Bentley Continental GT is the slowest car today, going into 17th for 126.434. Beats out an Audi RS5 by just a little bit, and also is only a fractionally slower than a Ferrari F355 Berliner. So a pretty good lap time from all of the vehicles here today, pretty good showing, and it is starting to populate the top of our leaderboard. Anyways friends, that is it for today's episode of the Forza Top Gear Laps. As always, if you have any suggestions for cars you'd like to see or themes you'd like to see, leave them down below in the comment section. However, next week I'm going to be covering some American cars, so look forward to that, and as always, thank you all very much for watching. My name's been the Real Emile, and until next time, farewell.